The sky over Greenville, a quiet town nestled in the hills of Colorado, had turned a violent shade of gray. Thunder cracked overhead as heavy rain poured down on the town like a relentless drumbeat. Streetlights flickered, and people rushed indoors to escape the storm's fury. But inside the town's only hospital, chaos was about to unfold. At exactly 8:42 p.m., the power went out. Emergency lights blinked weakly before dying completely. Medical staff scrambled, trying to manually operate machines and comfort patients in the ICU. On the 7th floor, the situation was far more critical. A billionaire real estate mogul, Edward Langston, was in a coma, dependent on life support machines. Without power, his condition was moments away from irreversible failure. The backup generator, old and poorly maintained, had failed to kick in. Down in a tiny garage on the outskirts of town, Lena Carter, a 26-year-old female mechanic with grease-streaked hands and a stubborn heart, was tightening the bolts on an old pickup truck she had inherited. The garage was her late father's, who had taught her everything she knew about engines, wires, and resilience. The storm rattled her roof, but she kept working. That's when her phone buzzed. It was a desperate call from Tom, the hospital's head of maintenance. "Lena, we need you badly. The generator's dead. We've got patients on life support. We can't get it to work." Lena didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," she said, grabbing her tool bag. She hopped on her battered motorcycle, zipped up her raincoat, and sped into the night. The rain blinded her, the wind pushed against her body, but she didn't slow down. Every second mattered. By the time she arrived at the hospital, the front lobby was filled with panic. Nurses and doctors moved with urgency, flashlights in hand. A baby cried in the distance. A young nurse tried to stop Lena, but she pushed past her. "Where's the generator?" she demanded. "Basement, through the east wing," someone shouted. Lena darted down the narrow stairwell, water dripping from the ceiling. The basement smelled of rust and mildew. She found the generator room, dimly lit, half-flooded, wires exposed. The massive machine sat in silence, its control panel blinking red. Tom stood by, helpless. "I tried everything. Let me handle it," Lena said firmly. She opened the panel, eyes scanning every wire, switch, and fuse. She noticed signs of a short circuit, probably water damage. Her hands moved quickly, cutting out the damaged section, replacing fuses, cleaning terminals. She didn't stop to think about the billionaire upstairs. She didn't know. She just focused on fixing what needed fixing. Upstairs, Edward Langston's doctor paced the hallway outside the ICU, phone pressed to his ear, trying to contact the nearest private hospital with power. But the storm had knocked out all major communication lines. The staff was on edge. "If the machines don't come back on in the next 10 minutes, a nurse whispered, "he won't make it." Downstairs, Lena wiped sweat and rain from her brow. "Try it now," she called out. Tom pressed the button. "Nothing." Lena muttered under her breath, then rewired another section. She pulled out her father's old toolkit, the one with the lucky silver wrench he always claimed could fix anything with heart. She tried again. This time, the generator rumbled, then roared to life. Lights flickered on across the hospital. Alarms beeped. Machines restarted. Life returned to the building like a breath of fresh air. Doctors rushed to the ICU. Edward Langston's monitor began to beep steadily again. His vital signs had stabilized. The room exhaled in relief. But Lena didn't know any of that. She packed up her tools, nodded to Tom, and walked back through the now-lit hallway. No one clapped, no one stopped her, but as she stepped out into the rain, a few hospital staff stared after her, wondering who she was. Just a mechanic, that's all they knew. What they didn't know was that the life she saved would change hers forever. The next morning, Lena Carter returned to her garage, soaked, exhausted, and with no expectation of thanks. Her boots left wet prints on the concrete floor as she parked her bike and dropped her tools with a sigh. For her, the night's work was just another problem solved, like fixing a broken axle or tuning an old carburetor. She didn't know the man whose life she saved, didn't know his name, didn't care. All she knew was that someone needed help, and she had the skills to give it. Across town, in the private suite of Greenville Hospital, billionaire Edward Langston opened his eyes for the first time in weeks. His son, Nathan Langston, sat at his bedside, teary-eyed and shaken. "Dad," Nathan whispered. Edward blinked slowly, then gave a weak smile. I heard the lights came back on. Nathan nodded. A Mechanica young woman fixed the generator in the middle of the storm. She saved your life. Edward, though weak, raised an eyebrow. Find her. Nathan was stunned. What? I want to meet her. 2 days later, Lena was back at work, wrestling with a stubborn oil filter, when a sleek black car pulled up in front of her garage. She barely noticed until a man in a suit stepped out and walked toward her, holding an umbrella. Lena Carter? He asked. She wiped her hands on her overalls and gave him a wary glance. Who's asking? I'm Nathan Langston. My father, Edward Langston, asked me to personally thank you for what you did during the blackout. Lena blinked. Oh, I didn't realize. Nathan smiled. Not many would have gone out in that storm. My father was in a coma. Your repairs saved his life. I was just doing what needed to be done, she replied, uncomfortable with the attention. Nathan extended an envelope. He insisted on giving you this. Inside was a check. Lena's hands trembled as she read the amount, $250,000. Her mouth fell open. Two can't accept this. That's insane. Nathan chuckled. He thought you might say that. That's why there's more. He pointed to the car. Would you come with me? Reluctantly, Lena agreed. She followed him back to the hospital, where she was led into the same suite where Edward now sat upright, sipping tea. He smiled when he saw her. So, you're the girl with the silver wrench? Lena nodded shyly. Just a mechanic, sir. No, he said firmly. You're a lifesaver. He gestured to Nathan, who handed her a folder. Inside was an offer letter and official contract to head a newly funded mechanical training center Edward wanted to build in Greenville. Full funding, salary, equipment, all under Lena's leadership. Her hands shook. Why me? Because people like you don't get the chances they deserve, Edward said. And sometimes it takes a storm to reveal who the real heroes are. Months later, the Carter Technical Institute stood proudly at the edge of town, offering classes to young mechanics, engineers, and technicians who'd never had access to such education before. Lena, now a teacher and mentor, still wore her grease-stained overalls, but her name was on the wall. Her story had spread far beyond Greenville articles, interviews, even a local documentary. Yet she remained humble. At the grand opening, Edward Langston stood at her side, frail but smiling. I used to think wealth came from buildings and contracts, he told the crowd. But real wealth lies in people like Lena. Lena looked out at her students, some from broken homes, some barely scraping by. Just like she once was, and she smiled. Sometimes it only takes one act of heart-fueled courage to turn a mechanic into a legend. 6 months had passed since Lena Carter became an unexpected hero, and the once humble mechanic was now an inspiration for thousands. The Carter Technical Institute had become a buzzing hub of hope and opportunity. Every day, students from low-income families, veterans, and former dropouts came through its doors to learn life-changing mechanical skills. Lena taught with passion, often staying late to help those who struggled, just as she had once struggled with self-doubt and poverty. Though the media had hailed her as the mechanic who saved a billionaire, Lena never let the fame get to her. She still rode her old motorbike, still used her original wrench set, and still insisted on fixing things herself, whether it was a loose bolt or a student's confidence. But despite the success, Lena felt a nagging question she hadn't been able to shake. Why had Edward Langston chosen her to lead this? The money, the platform, it all seemed too big, too generous. There had to be more to the story. That answer came on a quiet Wednesday evening. Lena had just finished locking up the workshop when she saw a familiar car parked outside. Nathan Langston stepped out, holding an old photograph in his hand. We need to talk, he said softly. They sat on a bench under a flickering street lamp. Nathan handed her the photo. And it was a much younger Lena, barely 10 years old, standing beside a woman who looked just like her, smiling proudly in front of a tiny apartment. My mom, Lena whispered, stunned. Nathan nodded. My father used to own that building. Your mother worked as a night cleaner there. She once stayed with my father for 2 hours when he had a diabetic seizure, called the ambulance, stayed by his side until we arrived. Lena's eyes widened. I never knew that. She never told anyone. My dad never forgot it. When he woke up after the blackout and heard your name, he made the connection. He realized he was given a second chance again, be the same family. Lena sat in stunned silence, her heart pounding. Nathan continued. This was never just charity, Lena. This was gratitude and respect. Tears welled in her eyes. But they weren't tears of weakness, they were tears of understanding. Her mother's quiet act of kindness had come full circle. Months later, Lena stood on a national stage as Women in Innovation honored her with a leadership award. The room erupted in applause, and among the front row sat Edward and Nathan Langston, proud and humbled. As the spotlight hit her, Lena took a deep breath. "I was never the smartest or the richest or the most connected," she began. "But I had two things, a wrench and a reason. And that was enough to fix what needed fixing, whether it was a generator or a life." The applause thundered again. Later that night, as she returned home, Lena looked at the stars above Greenville. She thought of her mom, of the storm, of the noise her motorbike once made as she raced toward that blackout-stricken hospital. She thought of the people who'd laughed at her overalls and of the patients now alive because she didn't wait for anyone else to act. Grease on her hands, fire in her spirit, Lena Carter, the mechanic no one saw coming, had not only saved a billionaire. She had built a legacy, and it was just the beginning.